Chairman Schwertner, I want to thank you for your work on Child Protective Services, DFPS, and especially in the area of mental health care. I think that's a critical work that is long overdue, and I appreciate what you've been doing, you and your committee. I also have some concerns, though, about what's going on with medically fragile children. It has come to my attention that there have been about 100 therapy providers leaving Medicaid acute therapy. And so my concern was that reducing the availability of these therapy providers, and what is the rationale for their departure? And so one of the concerns that I have is that we don't know exactly why they've left in terms of whether it was rate reductions, role re-enrollment requisites. And so we've been interfacing with HHSC and stakeholders to provide all that information. But I don't believe that the determinations and the calculations of how the therapy complaints are being quantified and qualified as an actual complaint can be thoroughly vetted, because unfortunately HHSC wrote in a document April 28th saying the determination of whether or not a complaint is substantiated is made by the entity that receives the complaint. So 99% of the complaints are received by the managed care organizations directly, and in those cases the MCO makes the determination whether or not a complaint is substantiated. So with that information, it troubles me, it concerns me that we only have about 1% of the complaint volume, and in that, between March and April, the reports of the complaints for members increased 64%, for providers 57%. Substantiated benefit and payment denial increased 62% in 1 month. And so my concern is that if you add that up and we don't know why the providers are missing or no longer in the program, I believe it becomes an access issue. In the Medicaid acute therapy, in particular, home health care for children is an access issue. I have stories of parents driving their children 3 times a week as far as 75 miles. I believe that the standard currently is 70 miles one way, and the average for therapy needs is 3 times a week. And so I'm not sure. I guess my question to you, Chairman Schwertner, is while I know that it was a difficult session, and I want to thank you for the work that you did and the funds that were put into mental health care and DPS, I'm still extremely concerned that what's come out of Rider 50 in last session, and I believe it's Rider 34 this session, that we may not be getting a full picture. And so I was hoping that as we move forward, and I'm not sure if what your plans are in terms of the interim, but how can we make sure that we don't just leave it up to the agency or the MCOs to make sure that we're getting the full picture on whether or not our constituents and their children are having an access to therapy issue. I know that's important to you, and it's critically important to probably everybody on this floor. This is an issue I believe that is across the state, whether it's rural Texas or urban Texas. Having providers is critically important. And so not something that I think, I appreciate the 25% rate therapy, I believe, increase that you've provided in this budget. I'm not sure how far that'll go, but I'm concerned that we've already had some providers leave, and we don't have the full picture of why they're leaving. And so I wanted to see what we could do over the interim to make sure that we get a clear picture, because like you've said, I'm not interested in overpaying, because I think that takes from people that need services if we're paying too much to one provider. But I want to pay a fair rate so that providers can stay in the program and that we don't have a reduction of access.
Thank you for your comments, Senator. A number of points I'd like to make in connection with what you said. First, it is a highly visible issue, and HHSC is following it very closely. I'm holding in my hand their latest report of provider availability, and the majority of the disenrolled providers, 85% of them, the reason for disenrollment has been the ACA requirement for re-enrollment. So that's the number one by far reason you have any diminished provider ranks. Regarding the continuation of looking at this issue in light of the increases or the restoration of some of the cuts from 2015, we do have Rider 215 that will continue to collect data on the number of providers and access issues over this biennium to make sure that we're not dropping the ball on any lingering concerns or growing concerns. And we'll have further information from that rider as well. The number of providers, according to HHSC, that have actually left because of rate cuts has been 4, according to the agency, out of 6,100 providers. So that's not a high number. But there's a lot of talk, a lot of discussion, a lot of politics and media about this issue. But the access issue is just, quite frankly, from an agency standpoint, not an issue yet. And we'll continue to monitor it through a variety of means, through our legislative offices, through the agency, and through dedicated evaluation, through direction through this budget on this issue.
Well, I appreciate your response, and what I most appreciate is the fact that you are committed, I believe, to making sure we don't have a loss of access. And when I brought this issue up to our esteemed chairwoman, she was in 100% support of the fact that we could not be looking for savings at the expense of our most fragile children in Texas. And so, these therapies are not therapies for them for educational purposes, but for living purposes. And so this is critical because, so many times we talk about helping our children, and we need to help all of them, even if sometimes it's a little more expensive to help some of them. And I appreciate your work on this. I look forward to, on this issue of the data, I think it's going to be critically important that we're careful not to let a translation issue between MCOs and the agency somehow not give us the clearest picture. And that's a concern for me. When we allow the MCOs to substantiate or determine what's a complaint and what's not a complaint, that concerns me somewhat. Because they're holding on to most of the data as they're the first point of contact.
I understand your comment there, sir. I just point you to Rider 215. It's a very detailed rider, one that was written and drafted to, I think, have a very comprehensive look at this issue as this biennium unfolds.
Okay. I'll look forward to looking at it and look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.